So let's bring Jason on and let's get right into our Oilers preview. And just right off the bat, I want to ask you, Jason, Knobloch had that quote the other day about the Buffalo Bills and their Super Bowl experience, and everyone got a good laugh out of that. But, you talk about Florida being here last year. Is there almost more pressure on them knowing what the moment is like just from recency bias? And maybe the Oilers, obviously it's a Stanley Cup final, it's the biggest stage there is, but maybe just a little naive to the magnitude of it.
Well, Edmonton does have 5 guys who have been there. And good morning, fellas. Corey Perry is the only one who's won, but he's lost his last 3. And Janmark, Ekholm, Kulak, Henrique have all lost once. So I think they're a team that's, got the pain of losing. But when I look at it, like fairly or unfairly, McDavid and Draisaitl, when you're the best players, like what's the criticism? People, wow, McDavid hasn't won, so he's not amongst the greats of the greats, which I'm a big believer that teams win the cup. McDavid could play unreal, but he only plays 21 minutes a night, right? So you need the rest of your team to help you out. But that's just kind of the pressure that goes along with being the greatest player of his generation. So, that's how it is. So I think there's probably equal ones. Like Boston was the last team who has lost consecutive Stanley Cups, right? In the finals, 77 and 78. And it only ever happened one other time. And that was like in the expansion era, which was when St. Louis, and that's when the NHL stupidly put the 6 expansion teams in one division for 3 years. And that guy they got swept every year in the cup final. So it's probably not even fair. So it's only ever happened once. Right. And only twice in that time, Pittsburgh came back and won after losing in 08 and then won in 09. And then the Oilers lost in 83 and then came back and won in 84. So it's rare kind of what Florida's done. To get there twice in a row is hard to do. And I think there's probably equal pressure on both, but for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, you're a Canadian team in the Stanley Cup Finals. There's just pressure that comes with that. I always equate, playing hockey in Canada to being in the NFL in America. It's that type of spotlight. It's that type of magnitude. I've been fortunate to be in that building out there for regular season games just to see what the atmosphere is like in the middle of winter when it's, minus 20 degrees out. It's absolutely incredible. But, you talked about Connor McDavid and he's obviously, I mean, I've been saying this from the get-go. We want Connor McDavid in prime time. We want him in this. We want the world to see Connor McDavid because he is one of the greats, whether he's won or he hasn't. LeBron James could play 48 minutes in a 48-minute game. Hockey isn't like that. So you're right. There is that team element. And you on Twitter yesterday, Jason, were talking about the matchup between Barkov and McDavid. And, I think you were shedding a little bit of light on a situation that I think a lot of people are maybe looking at in the wrong way. And I'm guilty of it. When I read your tweet, I kind of thought twice about it because I'm sitting there going, McDavid's going to have a hard time against Barkov. Like Barkov is this defensive star and this and that. But, I'm looking at your tweet and I'm going, wait a sec. Connor McDavid's the best player on the planet. How on earth am I looking at it from Barkov's perspective and not, Barkov is going to have a hard time with Connor McDavid? Is Barkov going to be able to produce and do what he's done when he's going against McDavid? And I'm going to read your tweet for those of our listeners who are audio only when they download. And it says, I understand all the discussion asking about how McDavid will produce versus Barkov, an elite two-way center, but I'd be surprised if Florida can win the series if their number one center is on the ice for one goal for it 5-on-5 in the series like he was versus the New York Rangers. Slowing down Zibanejad is much easier than slowing down McDavid. Can Barkov slow down McDavid? Should be asked just as often as how will McDavid handle Barkov? And look, I was guilty of this, and your tweet sort of made me shift my perspective a little bit. What do you think of this matchup? And maybe there's other factors and it's not just Barkov, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not just Barkov. I think Gustav Forsling, I bet you when the series is over, Forsling plays more minutes against McDavid than Barkov does, just because, you know what, like no team's really hard match. Like I looked at Zibanejad and he played 47 minutes against Zibanejad's line, and then he played like 27 minutes against Panarin. So it's rare that you're going to play all your minutes against one line. Like this isn't the 80s when Steve Kasper and Esa Tikkanen were shadowing guys, like literally skating right beside them for the whole game. And it's funny, like Forsling, I think Warren Fogle, who played in Carolina, said he thinks Forsling's like the new Jacob Slavin as far as just a pure, really good defender, excellent stick. And, Fogle told me a story how with Forsling, he's just a freak of nature physically. Like he blew all of their testing numbers out of the water. And then, he got put on waivers and the players were like, what? But they understood it. They had a lot of veteran guys there. But so Forsling can play tons of minutes and he's not going to get tired. Right. People before the Dallas series are like, hey, Chris Tanev, he's slowed down the other guys. And then what happened in game one? McDavid, Hyman, and Nugent Hopkins scored 3 goals against that pairing. Right. And Tanev lost 2 battles and he's a really good defender. So, I look at Barkov in that series and like Barkov's goals against, it's always hard in the playoffs because it's small sample size, right? Now, Barkov's elite, don't get me wrong. He's the best 2-way center of the game. I don't think there's any question about that. He took the torch from Bergeron and no one even blinked an eye. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But McDavid, like the Oilers have the 5 top scorers 5-on-5 in the playoffs. So they can produce, right? And, McDavid leads with 17. Well, Florida's top guy has 9. So, and Forsling's one of those guys, ironically enough. So I think that the McDavid Forsling matchup might be what we see more. And I do think it's going to be hard to score on Barkov. Don't get me wrong. But like I'm watching people talk about Zibanejad. I'm like, no offense to Mika Zibanejad. He's not in the same postal code as Connor McDavid. Right. And it's not just McDavid. It's McDavid.
No one
Hyman,
is.
right. It's McDavid, Hyman, and Nugent Hopkins, plus Bouchard and Ekholm. They kind of play like the Russian 5. Right. They play those 5 together a lot. And why not? Bouchard's your best offensive defenseman. So it will be, I think, those 2 units of 5, and it's going to be a great matchup. There might be moments of one-on-one, but the moments of one-on-one might be more McDavid versus Forsling.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a different side of matchups. This is something we actually haven't talked about yet in regard to both teams. Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk were on that Calgary Flames team that the Oilers eliminated 2 years ago when McDavid scored that overtime goal in Game 5. You think there's any animosity that will carry over, like just from those two having the presence in that battle of Alberta? Obviously, it's been a couple years since they've been there, but you got to feel like there's a little hatred build up from that, no?
Hey, dude, Tkachuk and Evander Kane, they're not sending each other Christmas cards. I'll tell you that. Like you've got 2 competitive guys, 2 really cocky guys, 2 guys, who can mouth off to each other. Like this, I look at Knobloch changed his lines and he took Kane and Holloway away from Draisaitl to kind of balance out his lines in game 4, 5, and 6 against Dallas, and it worked. But back at practice, he had Holloway there. Now, Kane doesn't practice. He's banged up, but he'll play in game 1. And I expect it'll be Kane, Holloway, and Draisaitl up against that Bennett, Tkachuk, Rodrigue line. And that Bennett and Tkachuk are going to try to, get guys off their game. Like if you can get David Pastrnak fighting you, that's how good you are at getting guys off your game. Like not just fighting you, but coming off the bench, pre-planned to fight you. Like what the hell's going on? I can't remember the last time I saw elite players do that. I thought it was great. But so that there will be that back and forth. Now in that series against Calgary, after game 1, which is a 9-6, it was a crazy game.
I remember that game.
Jay Woodcroft said, okay, I'm putting Evander Kane's line out every time against Tkachuk. And we didn't see Tkachuk the rest of the series. So, and afterwards, Evander Kane said, and that's why I like these 2 guys, because they'll both, they'll give you great quotes in the media and they'll chirp on the ice. And Kane said, hey, some guys like to talk. They don't like to be talked to. And so I think there's this like intimidation still part of the game and mental warfare is still part of the game. And I think you're going to see Kane and Holloway and Draisaitl. He doesn't shy away. He's not a shrinking violet, but he's more of he'll hit you with his stick than hit you with a fist. So
Holloway mixes it up though. I haven't seen much of that.
He's got a little sandpaper too.
Yeah. Holloway's like he's 200 pounds. He's a young guy. Like Evander Kane. How guys will drag you into it more. In the LA series, McDermott hammered Kane, and Holloway was the first guy who came run over. So like Holloway doesn't initiate it much verbally, but he will get in there, and he's pretty thick guy. So, like he's probably more engaged than Rodrigue will. Like it's going to be Bennett, Kane, and Tkachuk as the 3 guys for sure. Like Sam Bennett can really hit, right? Like you got to keep your head on the swivel when he's on the ice. So yeah, I think that's the matchup that's going to be really intriguing because that's 2 kind of, heavy lines with some skill, right? Like Draisaitl's ultimately skilled and, Bennett and Tkachuk are pretty good players themselves. So yeah, I like that. I think that matchup will actually have a lot more animosity and physicality than the other one we talked about.
Well, and the underrated part of all that is just this USA versus Canada, Canadian media. I don't think the Florida Panthers have ever seen the media ensemble that they are going to face every day in the finals now. And, I got to see this during the 11, finals, Jason, with the Vancouver, we were playing Vancouver, and obviously I wasn't talking to the media. I was on the ice getting bag skated while the media was in the locker room. But I remember how much extra, juice there was, because Luongo would make a comment, and then Tim Thomas would make a comment, and then Vigneault, and because the Canadian market amplifies everything, you've got to think, Evander Kane's good for some sort of, backhanded remark at Matthew Tkachuk, and then it's coming right back across the bow. And I think that's going to magnify all this. You haven't seen the Canadian team playing for a cup in a while. You've got this sort of cocky Florida Panthers group of players with Tkachuk and led by Tkachuk. Let's call it what it is. Look, I think it's a confident cocky. I don't think it's a total arrogant cocky.
No.
So I think it's a good type of swagger and cockiness. But I just think people who haven't been around or covered this with the Canadian team are just going to see a whole new level of how the Canadian market covers the NHL finals. And I think that's going to sort of draw this hatred out that I remember seeing on firsthand between guys like Lucic and Burrows and the biting incident. Like, I think we're in for that type of series.
Well, that would be great because, there was virtually no animosity in the Edmonton Dallas series. Like, it was, very respectful. They played hard, but there wasn't many hits. And, the Rangers, like I would watch them on opposite nights, and you'd be like, oh my God, like, are we in the Stanley Cup Finals here in Edmonton? Like, they're not, the series wasn't as physical. I expect it to be more physical. Now, Tkachuk and Bennett played, they started their career in Canada. So I think that they'll be used to it. Ekholm did talk about how when he made his first Stanley Cup appearance with Nashville, there was so much more other stuff that it took them a while to, hey, like, guys, yeah, we got to do all that stuff and our families and everything, but we got to be focused on the game. And he said it kind of took them a game and a half. And by then they were down 2-0 in the series, and it was lights out Irene. So, you know what? I think it will be like Florida was at the Cup last year, so there is coverage for sure. But you're right; it's any little nugget can sometimes be stretched out by some people, and I'm not a huge fan of it personally. But Kane and Tkachuk, like Matthew Tkachuk's great for the league. Matthew Tkachuk almost single-handedly got the Battle of Alberta back because of what he did with Kassian, and then he fought Kassian, and then it led to the goalie fight, and people are going crazy, and two teams were good again, so that helped. But I think Tkachuk's great for the game, honestly. Like, we need more personalities, and he's a skilled personality. He's not a guy who's playing 8 minutes a night. Yeah, he's leading their team in scoring. He plays tons of minutes. Like who will chew their mouth guard more in the series? Draisaitl or Tkachuk? That might be something to talk about.
And he's a legacy name too. I mean, look, whether you're a 70-year-old hockey fan or you're a 21-year-old hockey fan, you identify with that last name Tkachuk in so many different ways. And I think that type of thing is important, and having him on the big stage, I think that's great, Johnny.
Yeah. And kind of building off of that, I'm curious if we're going to see a meaner side of Connor McDavid. And kind of leading into this next question, we talked about it briefly with Ed Jovanovski yesterday, or Jovanovski. I keep saying Jovanovski. But do you think this series will have a different feel when it comes to officiating? Because, you think about that roughing call that Suter had, I think, on McDavid last round. And, I think a lot of people outside Edmonton were like, that's pretty soft. And, we know the Florida Panthers can be a little bit of bullies. Do you think the refs are going to blow their whistles a little bit more? Or is Connor McDavid going to have to, embrace that meanness a little bit more?
Well, what's interesting about the Suter penalty, though, is the one thing the league sent to all the players before the playoffs was they were cracking down on cross-checking. And that's what he did. And so they told the guys, if you cross-check in the numbers, you're getting a penalty. And they've been pretty consistent about it. Florida took the most penalties in the regular season, but I look at the Rangers series, like they only averaged 2.5 a game, right? Like that's not.
They were really disciplined against the Rangers. They were.
And so, like, even Edmonton only had 6 power plays in the first 4 games of the series. They only ended up with 11, right? Like, they had fewer power plays than the Rangers had in their series, right? Like, Dallas was they were the most disciplined team. And, Edmonton was still in it, but they went 0 for 6 in the first 4 games. And then their power play went 4 for 5 in the games 5 and 6. And so the truth is, eventually Edmonton's power play is going to score. And it's probably going to be 30% when the playoffs is over, when the series is over. It's just going to be a matter of, is it all going to come in one game? Will they spread it out? Right. And, and then there's as much as we talk about the Oilers power play, Oilers penalty kill is perfect in 2 of 3 series, which is almost unheard of. But I don't know if it'll be ref different. Like people want to complain about a call, but they forget that this was what the league said. We're cracking down on cross checks from behind. That's exactly what Suter did. Now you can hate it, but to me, it's kind of a penalty. There wasn't a lot of infractions called. There was more too many men and puck over the glass calls in that series, almost even, I think, than there was actual infraction. So, but Florida can't change. Like Florida's bread and butter is we're physical, we're aggressive, and that's how we win. So I think they look and say, yeah, you know what? Their penalty kill's good. What is it? 88%. So they'll look and say, hey, we can kill off penalties if we have to, but if we're going to stop being aggressive, that probably plays into Edmonton's hands. So you want to be composed, which I thought they were against the Rangers. I didn't think they were very undisciplined at all. So I'm more so curious about how many extracurricular scrums are we going to have? Because literally, guys, there might have been 2 in the entire series for Edmonton.
It won't be that way with Florida. That'll start.
We'll have 2 in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, that'll start quickly. But I also think Florida's got to be careful because you don't want to put Edmonton on the man advantage. No. So look, I know you've got a show you've got to run to here in a minute. So the last one I want to leave you with, other than the big guns who everybody's familiar with, is there a player that you look at in this series on Edmonton that could be an X factor? Whether it's a depth guy, whether it's Calvin Pickard. I mean, I would hope it isn't Calvin because that means something is not going well. But who's the guy we're not expecting that you believe, based on what you've seen in the playoffs, could be a difference maker in this series?
Well, the guy who has to be if they want to win is Darnell Nurse, right? Bouchard and Ekholm, we know they're good, but you can't win with just one pairing. And Darnell Nurse had struggled up until game 4. Game 4 against Dallas was like his awakening in the playoffs. He had 11 hits in the entire series against Vancouver in 7 games. He had 12 hits in game 4 against Dallas. And then he just continued after that. He got physically engaged. He's their best skating defenseman by a mile. It's hard to beat him wide. And he was sitting back and just giving up the blue line and giving up his gaps was terrible. And so I believe like they'll get depth guys, Janmark, Henrique. They'll probably score a goal here or there. Like, do I expect a guy to chip in a lot? Maybe, but I honestly think because the amount of minutes he plays, they need a good 19 to 21 minutes from Darnell Nurse. If they get that, I think Edmonton's chances of winning increase significantly. But if Nurse struggles like he did in the first half of the Dallas series, I think it's really hard to win because we talked about off the top. Your best defense pair is playing 21 minutes, whatever it is. Now, some of that's on the power play, but they need Nurse 5-on-5. His penalty kill's been great, but they need him 5-on-5. And if he does, I think Edmonton's chances go up a lot.
Yeah, I've always liked him because
he's a really good player. Like he's their best.
His uncle's Donovan McNabb, and I grew up a huge Eagles fan, and Donovan McNabb was the quarterback growing up. And I remember when Nurse got drafted, they talked a lot about how Donovan McNabb was his uncle. So I've always wanted to see him do well. For Edmonton. So look, we know you got to run. You can catch Jason all over Nation Network on a lot of the different platforms. What show are you are you heading over to do right now?
Doing the DFO rundown with Frank Saravalli. So we always record it every Thursday morning. And yeah, we got that. And then got the show on Sports 1440 later today and a few other stuff. So that's fun times, man. There's no shortage of topics right now. So it's good.
And you will at some point in the series, you'll be on the road a little bit later in the series.
Yeah,
right?
A little bit later on. Yeah, I got some family commitments. So you got to stay married. So I'll be doing that. But then games 5, obviously game 6 will be here. So it should be I'll be stunned, guys, if this series ends in 5 games.
Yeah, I don't see it happening.
We want 7, no matter what. We want 7. Maybe not. When you have a dog in the fight, you might want you get it over as quick as you want, but we want 7. So check out Jason all over DFO's platforms, Edmonton Radio. You've been covering this team for a long time. We appreciate you jumping on with us today. Enjoy your show. Tell Frank we said hi. I'll see him in a couple of hours on DFO Live. I'm filling in for Tyler today. But otherwise, we'll check in with you a little bit later in the series. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, guys. I love your show. I watch it lots, and so I appreciate having me on.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.